This Sunday in this series, From the Pew to the Pulpit. And this guest you've met before. He's been on the platform. You all think he's hilarious. I think he's a great guy. Him and his wife, Justine, have been married for 6 years. They've been attending here for 3 years, and they've had 2 kids in the time that they've been here. It's like, wow, they've been busy. He's a North Branch teacher. And some of you, if you've been around in the early days of him being around, he used to drive a hearse. That's really cool. He is also, I just found out, an identical twin. Pretty wild. Hey, would you give a warm welcome to Jake Harren? It's like, woohoo!
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today. And as many of you know, I've done announcements a couple times, and some of the guys in car care and wood shop and man church said, you know, it starts with announcements and pretty soon you'll be up there on the platform. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, guys. And then the next time I did announcements, they're razzing me again. So to all of them who are here, you're right, I'm up on the platform. They got me. But again, I want to welcome those of you who are here and those of you who are watching from afar. I feel like my intro video was maybe a little less than Pastor Gordon a couple weeks ago and Brian from last week. I don't have the experience those guys have. I was thinking that some of the experiences they have started before I was even born in their pastoring. So I know I'll take heat for that from Brian next time I work in the kitchen with them. So the first slide here, just to tell you a little bit more about us. That's my daughter and my wife and my son, my daughter Amelia up there. We just moved to North Branch in January. Want me to do something different with that? We just moved to North Branch in January, and it wasn't very snowy this winter, but we moved some mulch that the previous owner found, and my daughter thought we hit the treasure chest there because it was like 45 degrees out. That next picture there, that's us almost a year ago at my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's wedding, and we were all in the wedding, and my daughter was the flower girl. The next one there is Rodney. He's 3.5 months, and that's the face he makes apparently when we hear a pileated woodpecker. I was outside giving him a bottle, and I didn't know they made noise. I just thought they pecked wood. And that's the face he made. He stopped drinking, like, what? They make some weird kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was weird. And then the last one, it's hard to see, but I'm wearing a red shirt there, and there's a large wet spot because we've been potty training at home for a month. And that was one of those parenting situations where I'm like, well, I'm not mad because you didn't pee on the couch. I don't have to clean the cushion, but you still peed on me. But she's doing better. We're making progress. So that's a little bit about my family. Our emphasis for today, or my topic here, is God's plan and not mine. And I'm guessing that maybe some of you have felt that way before, where you want to know what God's plan is, but maybe your own plan gets in the way. The next slide here, I want you to take some time to think. There's a lot up there, but we're going to see that slide quite a few more times today. I want you to think about, how do you pray? Do you pray? When do you pray? Why do you pray? These next couple of bullets here are just some maybe general answers. Maybe you can relate to some of those. There are also more answers that I didn't put up there. Maybe you pray all day long without ceasing, and you're biblical about it. Maybe you pray because you're supposed to, because you know Christians are supposed to, out of a sense of obligation. Maybe you pray over meals, that's how you were raised. Maybe you pray when things are going well. You're more of a praiser. You don't just pray over everything, just when things are going good. Maybe you pray sometimes and you don't really think about it. Maybe you pray only when things go from bad to worse. I know I've done that before, kind of as a lifeline instead of all the time. Maybe you pray never. You don't want to bother God with your woe me problems. You think about other countries and other people, even in our own country, in our own city, that might have it worse off than you or a bigger hardship than you. Like, I don't need to bother God. I'm doing pretty well here in my life. Maybe you never pray because you don't really know what to say or how to say it. I know there's been times where I've felt like that also. The last one here, I got a little bolder for us. I'm hoping that maybe some of you are there, and this is a goal for me, and I feel like I've been there before. I want to pray often, and I want his will and plan for my life, not my own. That's where I want to be. I want to pray often because I want his will and plan for my life and not my own. So, food for thought here in our morning. I grew up a little bit more about me in a Christian home. I was very fortunate to have not only parents, but both sets of grandparents who also already knew Jesus. And I remember going to church not only with my own family, but with grandparents at times, and I feel very fortunate for that. As Pastor Mike said in the video, I do have a twin brother. We're identical twins. He couldn't be here today, otherwise I was going to make him do something, but you would have been able to tell. We're a little different, but we sound the same. If I made you turn around, you would know who was talking. And I have a younger sister too, named Molly, and she's here this morning, and I'm glad that she's here. And believe it or not, growing up, I know some of you who know me here, I wasn't always this social and talkative and willing to talk to anybody about anything. I definitely felt growing up like I was more in my brother's shadow. He was a little more into what was cool at the time or trying to be hip and modern. And if you can see the outfit I'm wearing here today, if you met me in 4th grade, I'd probably be wearing the same thing to school. So I wasn't what you call the ladies' man back then. So I just kind of, not that I am now, but I just kind of followed him in that shadow. Like, well, people kind of lump you in like, oh yeah, sure, your twin brother can come along, you know. It was easy to make friends if your brother made them all and you just joined in. Also growing up, church and faith, they didn't always seem related to me. I remember times growing up where we would go to church because it was fun, because we wanted to. We would go to church out of a sense of obligation at times. There were other times growing up where it seemed like there was more to church. Like I understood there is a God that we're praying to. This isn't just like we're going through the motions. But I didn't always sense that growing up, like in elementary school. There were also times growing up that I remember hearing from our youth pastors, and this always stuck with me, and maybe some of you have heard this message here, that we are the church, and the church isn't the building. And I just always had that kind of vision growing up, where like all of us get up and we like take part of the church with us each week, like the building itself. I know it's kind of an abstract idea. And then we come back and put it back together. Because if none of us show up next week, this is just an empty building. And I really like that idea of we come do church once a week or twice a week, however often you're coming here. But when we all leave, we take that with us and we go and we do what God called us to do. And we come back and we're in fellowship. But he didn't just call us to do that once a week with other people who already maybe know him. And I had that image growing up in my head too. Some other things growing up that made it difficult. This will be a question. You'll have to get your hand ready here. How many of you either currently or grew up in a house where a parent, a spouse, someone in your immediate family had not normal hours, either second shift or third shift? How many people does that affect here? Okay, so a couple. That was something that happened in our house too. My dad drove truck and he was home every night or every morning, but he was gone a lot. And there were times where it made going to church more difficult with that schedule. And part of the times I remember thinking like, why are we going? Like, what if Dad falls asleep when he's trying to be doing his job, you know, to support us? Like, is it really worth going? And then we have the occasional pastor at this church we were going to that is just like insert groan here. You're like, dude, you already said that. Halfway through your sermon, you started the sermon over. Like, you're running into the next service. Like, it just got like, why are we here? I'm not going to do that today. There isn't another service, so you're stuck. But I just remember thinking that, like, can't the guy tell everybody he's groaning here? Like, and I was only in middle school at this time, sitting in big church like right now. Like, what's the point of being here, dude? Like, it seemed like he wasn't prepared or something. So I have some of those images, and I'm thinking more about, like, why can't we go to a church that works better for our family? Like this getting up early and then Dad trying to go to work a couple hours later, that doesn't seem fair to him. And I just remember that wasn't really my problem, but I remember kind of being a part of that growing up. And also along this same time, now we're moving ahead kind of into the middle school years, I'm trying to stay cohesive, but a little jumping around. I remember going to a fall church camp, a weekend retreat with the church that we were going to. And there was lots of kids. It was a big retreat. It was up in at Big Sandy in McGregor. It was a fun camp, and for someone like me growing up, that was like the first time we were like really getting away, and you're on the long bus ride, and it's not like mom and dad drove you there and drove you home. Like, you're doing your own thing. It was kind of cool. And the theme for that weekend was being dead to sin and alive in Christ. And that stuck out to me because when we walked off the bus, we got there late at night, and we're walking into the worship area. They had a coffin set up with no bottom and no top. And a coffin is the kind like Dracula sleeps in, where it's curved on top and the casket's rectangle. So this was the coffin kind. And I just remember walking in going like, what the heck is going on around here? Like, I knew the theme. They had talked about that on the bus, but we got a coffin that we're going to be doing something with. That just seemed a little odd to me. But it was very vivid in my mind, so whoever came up with that, it worked. And I remember that weekend truly accepting Jesus as my Lord and my Savior. I remember, I don't know, during one of the songs, I just kind of felt like this is a decision I want to make to follow him, and I didn't really know what that was going to look like. And there had been previous times, I'd say in like upper elementary school, where I had decided to follow Jesus more like in a peer pressure sense. But I remember this retreat, a lot of volunteers were there, just a lot of other kids' parents. And it was just one of the moms that I prayed with who had a very calming personality, which is kind of necessary when you're working with a bunch of middle schoolers, especially us boys. Like, we were always just trying to start something. And she never got riled up. She never raised her voice. She'd come and settle a problem. And I just remember this calming spirit about her. And I felt comfortable enough to pray with her. And she led me through a prayer that allowed me to accept Jesus. And it felt weird because I was expecting to like walk away from praying with her, and all of a sudden there'd be this like, oh, I don't know what was going to happen, but that's what I thought. And I walked back in and I'm like, okay, there's still a coffin in the middle of the worship thing, and there's still a bunch of kids, like some are singing and some are being goofy. Like, I guess I accepted Jesus and nothing really is different yet. But previous to that, a couple years before, I remember accepting Jesus more out of the sense of like, well, that's what everybody's doing on a Sunday morning here with the elementary kids, so I should do it. And we had some guest speakers who were there who were going to get all of us to speak in tongues. And this was at a Lutheran church. And, yeah, okay, so I had heard of speaking in tongues, but depending on who you talked to at that church, it was kind of like, oh, you don't do that here. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What are we going to do? Well, pretty soon they're like in the crowd of 4th and 5th graders, like getting everybody to come up here. And I'm like, oh, I thought that was like a gift. Like, I didn't know much about it, but I don't think everybody's supposed to just do that because you're telling us to. At least that's how I understood it then. And there were kids in my youth group from Wednesday nights that were there on this Sunday morning, and they're just like running up there and babbling into the microphone and then coming back and like laughing about it. And I'm kind of thinking, I'm not standing there with my arms crossed, but visualize here. As a 5th grader, I'm going like, this is what we're doing here. You guys are going up there. This is what it means to follow Jesus. Like, these people are weird. These people up here are weird, trying to make us talk like something I don't understand. These kids are being weird, acting like it's funny to do this. Like, I thought this was serious. So some of my experiences to that point made me think that people who follow Jesus at times were weird, which is funny because you're listening to the guy who drove a hearse to church for fun. So we are weird. That's right. But I had thought about that moment, and it definitely felt different when I decided to do it for myself. It was a choice that I had made, and I didn't feel like I had to. I feel like I got to. And that 7th grade experience, and again, that visual image of I can be dead to my sins and the wrong choices I can make, and I can be alive to Christ. And they had us walk through that upright coffin, which was kind of weird, but it stuck with me. It was very powerful. So if we jump ahead here to one of my verses, it's my life verse, if you will. It's Deuteronomy 31:6, and this is from the NIV. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. And I bolded there, he goes with you. And this verse always stuck out to me around that time. I remember it I don't know, kind of jumping off the page at me around 7th, 8th grade. Because the Lord goes with you. He'll never leave you nor forsake you. And I think about that. I thought about it then, and I think about it now. If you're on a path and you feel like God's called you there, he's right there with you. If maybe you don't know God and you're not really sure what to make of him, or maybe you feel like you knew him and then you strayed away and you're over here somewhere, he is still right there with you. Now, whether you acknowledge him or talk to him or invite him to be a part of your life, even if you're over here and you're intentionally, deliberately going, you know exactly what God isn't calling you to do, or opposite of even maybe biblical truths, he's still right there with you. So I'd hate to break it to you if you've experienced this, but you can't get away from him in that sense. He's right there. And that was always encouraging to me. He goes with you. So even if you make the wrong choice, it's not like you're like, right, he's still over there. No, he's right here. He's there with you if you let him in. And again, about this time, so we're going to a church that isn't always seeming meaningful on the weekends, and sometimes there's like people coming to the kids' stuff, making you do things that seem weird, and there were just some other things, and then my dad's work schedule was ever changing with different Sunday start times, and we got a flyer in the mail around this time to go to a church near us. We grew up in Circle Pines that had Saturday night services. I was like, well, that seems sensible, let's try that. I mean, that was my thought. I'm not in charge here, I'm the middle schooler, but it seemed sensible to me. And I remember this change, and that we could make church a priority and make even our faith more so with that a priority, and we didn't have to like have it affect other parts of our life. And I remember feeling less worried. I don't even know if my mom and dad are here today, but I don't even know if they know that. Like thinking some worry, like maybe I should call dad in the middle of the night because he's gonna fall asleep or something. Like that wasn't my problem, but I still thought about it. And we started going to this church on Saturday nights, and things there started clicking. And I remember in my parents, but especially my dad, I think maybe just because I'm a guy and so is he, but I remember this change of, instead of like talking about how church and having a faith is important, I remember them like they didn't need to say anything anymore. Like they were showing us that. And I remember, sorry, getting a little emotional about it. I remember following them and thinking like, wow, they don't need to like tell you that it's important. Like we're going, like they're doing it. And I encourage you with that. If you have middle schoolers right now or high schoolers and you're not cool anymore and they don't want anything to do with you anymore, things like that they're still watching you. And if they're putting up a fight and they're making something difficult, I just encourage you. Like I think back, like that was really powerful. I wasn't planning to get teary-eyed, but that was really powerful when that happened. And also around this time, I remember after going to church on Saturday nights that my mom talks about this too when I was asking her about it. She remembers us kids, my brother and sister and I, like we'd be talking about the message. We're attending big church with them. And we'd be talking about like, remember what the pastor said? Like, we can apply that to our life like right now. And it felt so cool to me. That was the first time I remember going, these things in the Bible, this really old book, and our life now, like they're not that far apart. Just because it's a book written by people that a lot of us have never met in person doesn't mean that it's not practical and something that we can live out. I also remember attending Bible studies with my dad. He started going to a men's group, and my brother and I would follow him. And sometimes we felt a little weird because we were middle school, high schoolers hanging out with a bunch of dads at this men's group, but it was just a powerful time to be reading the Word together. Also at this time here, if we go ahead to the next slide, I want to jump back to that prayer slide. This time I remember we each had our own devotions going at home, and we had things to talk about from church on the weekend. I felt like maybe even as a family, but as myself, I was praying often like I wanted his plan and will for my life. Like that's where I felt like I was at. I felt like I was close to God, and we had made some choices as a family and as individuals to do that. I guess I didn't start with this, but I'm sharing a little bit of my testimony and faith story today, so should have opened with that. If you hadn't picked up on that, maybe you need to turn them up. I'm not making fun of people that are here. I do this at school all the time. I teach elementary school, and I'm like, I'm waiting for you, turn them up. So, yeah, there were just some powerful things that happened then. Around this time, too, moving ahead a little bit, now I'm probably like in high school. I had to start volunteering or get some volunteering hours for one of I think it was a health class I was taking. I don't know. We needed like 20 community service hours, and volunteering at church qualified. And I was like, well, that sounds good. I'm already there, so I'll get a little more involved. And I started volunteering in the kids ministry, the preschoolers, not necessarily because as a high school, like a 10th grader, especially a boy, like I really wanted to do that, but that's where they had the biggest need, was at the preschoolers. And I was like, okay, I guess I can help out with the preschoolers. And I also, around this time, thinking back, I could drive. I had my own car then, so I was thinking I could help out with some of the Wednesday night stuff. I remember thinking back to my youth leaders in 6th and 7th grade. Now, the two that we started with, they were Drew and John. They didn't do anything like amazing or awesome. I don't even know if I could tell you anything they said. But what I do know is they were there every week, and they put up with us and our middle school boy antics. And if you've ever been around middle schoolers, especially middle school boys, that might test your patience for some of you. And that was really powerful to me that they were there. I'm like, well, I can do that. I can show up on a Wednesday and be there for kids, even though I don't feel like I'm super qualified to do so. If you're available on a Wednesday night and you can show up, you're qualified to do so. And that's true here, not just the church we were attending. But so I'm starting to get involved here at this church that I'm at. And I'm with the preschoolers on the weekends. Again, started because I needed some community service hours for a class. And the kids pastor at this church, this is now later high school, probably like senior year, maybe going into college. The kids pastor starts approaching me and wants me to consider teaching in the preschool room. There's kind of the preschoolers and kindergartners come together for a larger teaching session. And I'm like, yeah, how about you find somebody else to do that? I didn't say that. That's what I thought. I'm thinking, like, I'm already here every other weekend with the preschoolers. Like, what do you need more from me? Like, I was being a little ungrateful there. And I'm thinking to myself, teachers have to practice. Teachers have to plan lessons. Teachers have to make fools of themselves. Teachers have to sing songs. So you have to sing, and you have to know the actions, and you have to wear a microphone, and you have to do these things in front of a large group of children. You have to manage those children. And I'm like, I've been in this room for 2.5 years with these kids. Some of them are unmanageable. You have to do this in front of the other adult volunteers. And I'm like, they're going to be judging me. They're going to be like, we got this guy up here? Like, this is the best we could do? That's what I'm thinking. Some of you are thinking that right now. Like, not quite, but I'm thinking these things, and I'm answering nicely. Each week I'm there, they're bugging me to think, consider it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm considering it. Okay, whatever. I'll pray about it. Okay. And I know that's not the right way to do it, but that was kind of I was a senior in high school. Like, I don't want to be bothered with this. Okay. So I'm thinking to God, same slide here. No. This isn't my plan, God. I don't want to do this thing that these two are asking me to do. Like, go find somebody else. Around this point, I feel like maybe I was praying more of a time only when things were bad to worse. I wasn't as close to God as maybe I had been. But I'm still thinking, like, this isn't my plan. I don't want to do this. I don't really care if you want me to do this. I wasn't gathering he wanted me to do this. I was gathering that this kids pastor wanted me to do this. And I was tired of hearing from her about it. Also around this time, this is where his reference to me driving a hearse here. I had this dream, I guess. It's not everybody's dream, I get it. Since 4th grade, I attended my great uncle's funeral down in Illinois. And I remember it was kind of snowy out in the countryside. I was like Rockford, Ashton area out there. And so the snow was blowing across the road in the fields. And I remember this black, shiny Cadillac pulling up. And I'm like, this is my first funeral I'd been to. And all I thought was, I don't know what that is, but I want to drive one of those. It was the hearse. And I didn't really, again, I'd never been to a funeral before. So some things I liked about this funeral that I thought were interesting to me that, like, I don't know, seemed exciting. The visitation seemed like a lot of fun. We were, family was together telling stories about great Uncle Bill. My great Uncle Bill had Parkinson's. I knew he wasn't suffering anymore. We weren't super close to him, but I had met him a few times in my life to know that he had gotten sicker. I remember this. I don't know if my mom was there. I don't know if she remembers this, but there's a lot of people at the visitation, so you could, probably do things and nobody'd see you. But I remember touching his mustache as he's laying in that casket because he had a nice mustache, like Tom Selleck here, and I remember thinking as I did that, like, he doesn't look dead. He just looks like he's sleeping, and I guess I was expecting him to look dead. So I shout out to that funeral home, nice work. But I had this image in my head. All these things seemed like, I'm 9, seemed cool. Like, this is kind of a cool experience. And then the shiny hearse, he's in the box, we put him in the hearse, and the hearse drives him to church, and the hearse drives him to the cemetery, and then they start shooting guns off. I'm like, this is great. I know we're all standing here like this, but that's what I was thinking. So that was my 4th grade thought. But when you're a 4th grader and you have this thought, you're not going to go start telling everybody, you're like, hey, I want to be a hearse driver. Hey, I want to be a hearse driver. I'm like, that kid has got issues. So I just kind of kept that to myself. And every time I saw a hearse, I was like, oh, that's so cool. But I didn't say anything. I know it's weird, but God didn't call all of us to be hearse drivers for a reason. So around this time, jumping back ahead, so that was something that happened to me 4th grade. Had that thought running with me ever since. Never really pursued it because I knew that'd be kind of weird, people would say. I started working at a nursing home. My friend Jeff, who's here today, his grandpa was at a nursing home, and we'd go down there almost once a week. I'd go with him, and we'd play cards. And I got to know a lot of the residents there. And about this time, I'm graduating high school, and this nursing home in White Bear was close to Century College, where I was going to go do my 2-year anyway. Like, I should just be a nurse's aide. I already know half these people, and this is fun to hang out with old people. Well, it was fun to hang out with old people, but I realized at a nursing home, there's only 2 ways to leave a nursing home. Unfortunately, if you get hurt, you got to ride in an ambulance, and if you don't make it and it's your end of life, you leave in a hearse. And I learned that, and I started seeing that, and it brought me like a sense of calm or peace. Now again, some of you are like, that's not for me. I know. But the more these things would happen around working as a nurse's aide, and you get close to someone, you get close to their family as they come visit, and they end up passing away, it brought me the sense of peace to be there with them. I could see the turmoil and the arguments and the things that happen after someone passes away, even if they're really old, and like it shouldn't have been a big surprise that someone who's pushing 100 didn't make it. But these people sometimes would just lose it in arguments and, all kinds of things right there as someone's passing away or did just pass away. And I had a sense of peace about being there in these situations. There was one person in particular who I took care of. We're going to call her Dorothy. That wasn't her name. But she was very over the top. And she had quite the attitude problem, and she didn't want anybody helping her. And I had known her from volunteering there with my buddy. And she'd come out at all hours of the night, dressed to the nines like she's going to a party, and just do odd things. And I'm like, okay. And she wouldn't let anybody help her. But I started working there. And for some reason, most people would just kind of skip her room. They'd look in on her and make sure she's, alive, but they wouldn't go and try and agitate her. Well, me trying to be the diligent nurse's aide that I was, I went in there and I'm straightening up her room and I'm trying to put away her laundry. And she was super pleasant. I'm like, what are all these people worried about? She's nice. And she would start letting me help her with things like, all the things that you need to get help with when you're older. She'd let me help her brush her teeth, and she'd let me help her with her clothing, and she'd let me help her do all the things that she wouldn't let other people do, which she needed, and I'm glad I could do that. As time went on, she eventually got sick, and she passed away too, and I was at her funeral, and I was telling her son all about this, because she had quite an unpleasant attitude with everyone. But with me, I never really saw that side of her too much. And her son, when I was talking to him, I told him how she always called me Joe, even though my name's Jake. But like, whatever, she's most likely got Alzheimer's or something. Like, no big deal. If she can call me whatever she wants as long as I can help her. And he brought a picture from their wedding, and my twin brother and I could have been the triplet to her husband when they got married back in like 1940 something. And that just stuck with me. Like, for whatever reason, God used me in that situation. Apparently just because I looked like somebody. And it worked out well for her. But over and over in this job, I had been exposed to people slowly passing away and then passing away and all the things that go with that. And it kind of made me lead towards, well, I don't really know what it means to be how you go get a job as a hearse driver, but I guess I could go to school to be a funeral director. So I decided I was going to do that. But at the same time, I'm making too many big life choices here at once, people. At the same time, I caved at church, and I'm like, fine, I'll start teaching in kids ministry, like, just stop bugging me. So I got my kind of plan here, what I'm going to do with my career, and then I'm going to go, and I'm teaching in kids church. And if we jump ahead to that slide, this is definitely a time where I feel like God called me and then equipped me. And I know maybe a lot of us have heard that. Maybe it gets almost cliche at church, if you will. But it's true. It's true again. He's not always going to say, well, you know all these things, so therefore you're qualified. He's going to say, go do this, and I'll help you do it along the way. But you got to step out in faith. And this is a time where I feel like he did that. And Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And I bold again, for I know the plans. Why so many of us, including me, spend so much of our life going, I'm going to try this, or I'm going to go do this, or see you later, God, I'm doing that, or I want to do this, you can come with me, God, but I'm not doing what you want me to do. He knows the plans. He wrote the plans. He's got the playbook, however, whatever your analogy is. So why do we spend so much time going like, I'm going to try it over here. I'm going to try it over here. He has the plans for us. And I'm not perfect at always listening to what God wants me to do or asking what he wants me to do. Because sometimes if you ask him, God, what do you want me to do? He might tell you something you don't want to hear. So then we get in the habit of, I'm not going to ask him. What if he tells me something? Anyway, I'm at kids ministry. I feel like he definitely is equipping me along the way. Called me first, is helping me out. Some of those things I thought about teaching were true. You did have to practice and plan ahead and work on lessons. You did have to make a fool of yourself often. These are preschoolers. You got to they got an attention span of that. So I have a toddler now. She has an attention span like that. I did have to sing and do silly actions wearing a microphone in front of a large group of adults and children. Yep, those things were true. I did have to manage a lot of kids. Sometimes on the holiday services, it felt like too many kids. There were adults in there, but they weren't there to judge me. They were there going like, thank you that we don't have to be on the stage. So not everything I thought was true, but some of those things were true. But I realized, hey, some of these things I'm good at. They are hard, but I'm good at them. And there were some situations. I had this kid, I'm tall, they're short. So I used to do this when they'd leave, and I'd give them a high five on the way out as their parents were coming to pick them up. And this one 3-year-old boy, I'm down on my knee, he comes up, I was expecting a high five. I got a kiss on the lips, not just a peck on the cheek, full on. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know if you can get fired as a volunteer, but I'm out. And this dad comes running down the hall, and he pulls him back. He's like, I'm so sorry. He's gotten into this kissing thing at home, and he just kisses everybody. And I was like, okay. Now, fast forward. That is something that I would have had to experience then, help me in my teaching career. I've run into situations where kids do things, you're like, okay. Another situation that has helped me in the classroom that I didn't think about. We had a guest pastor visiting during a holiday service, and his daughter's in the front row. This is kindergarten. So usually the kindergartners by that point in the preschool room, the kindergartners are they're the head honchos. They're pretty cool in the preschool room because they haven't moved up yet, so they're the biggest and the oldest. And she's wearing a fancy Christmas dress, like a lot of the kids were all dressed up for the Christmas. And she starts twirling, and I realized she decided to go commando to Christmas church. So that's fine. I'd run into that before with, different potty training approaches and whatever. But she's emphasizing the way she's twirling and holding her dress, like everybody needs to see this. And there's 50 other kids in here. And I'm like, this is a little distracting. And other kids are starting to notice. I'm like, what do we do with the kid in the front row? Who's the guest pastor who's visiting's kid? So I tell, also, I'm a guy and this is a girl. I'm like, this seems like it's going to be a problem. So I tell the kids pastor, and after service, they talk to the guest pastor about it, and he's super embarrassed in his life. And this girl's been getting herself dressed on her own. She's in kindergarten now. And they told us that she's decided that she doesn't always need to wear underwear because she's potty trained. Why does she need that? I mean, I guess I get to your point a little. She's 6. So that experience I didn't know was then helped me in some of my other experiences teaching where kids don't want to wear what they're supposed to wear. So if we move ahead here, I'm teaching a lot. I'm going to community college, getting my generals done. I feel like I'm at a time where I'm almost tooting my own horn. I'm at I'll pray sometimes. Like, God, I answered your call to do this teaching with the kids stuff. So stop having people bug me about stuff. I did what you want me to do, now I'm gonna go do it. I'll talk to you later. That was kind of my attitude at that point. And the next slide here. This is a verse that we often practice a lot with the kids in kids' church. The fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22 and 23, is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. And I like this verse because oftentimes if you've been around a while, or if you're trying to decide if Jesus is right for you, or wherever you're at on your journey with God, this is the verse of I can and I get to. And you don't really need any of the other verses other than love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But these are all the things that we get to do. That doesn't mean they're easy, but we get to do these things. And there's no rule book against doing these things. You can do these things every day, all day long if you want. And if you did, we'd probably be set up for success. Not just us, but other people we encounter. And this verse stuck out to me as, I would say, being a Christian isn't like a lot of people think, where it's all these rules and things that I don't get to be a part of and I can't do. This is what you get to do. But again, if you ask God for, God, help me be more patient, he might throw you in a room full of toddlers. If you say, God, help me have self-control, he might, one Sunday morning, he might have your car break down on the way home from kids' church when you're trying to get to work at the nursing home. Not only break down, but the air compressor seized up and the belt caught on fire. Anyway, he throws you in situations where, okay, if you want more of this, this is what it looks like to practice this. But there's no rules and laws against those things, and I found that really encouraging around this time. So at this point now, I've been going to community college. I've been working as a nurse's aide. I stopped doing that. The every other weekend thing was not working out with church. They were needing more from me. I was getting burned out. I did some other jobs here and there. And I decided that I'm going to finish this 2-year degree, which at that point I had declared was pre-mortuary science. I was going to go to the U and be a funeral director. And I had decided, this is good because, if you're a pastor, you're up here, saving people and stuff. But if you're a funeral director, you deal with people passing away and people asking questions about what's next. I could talk to everybody I encounter about being saved. Now, I realize looking back, this isn't where God was calling me, but at the time, that was my kind of warped ideology. I'm just going to talk to everybody about Jesus, and they're all going to be sad and emotionally raw, and I'm going to swoop in, and I'm going to save everybody. Because that's what God wants, right? He wants you at, everybody at a funeral. Do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Do you know? That's what people need. Can you imagine sitting in a funeral home with someone who's like, and what flowers do you think Grandma would like? And do you know Jesus? But that's what I thought. Pastor, funeral director, I'm going to save a lot of people. I'm not here, but I'm going to be here. I know it's twisted, but I had kind of taken what I wanted to do and been like, this is God's plan for my life because I said so. That's how I've been thinking about it. Again, I know that wasn't his plan looking back, but doesn't God want everybody to have the holiest career they can by talking about him all the time? No, because then you become one of those weirdos that turns off people to knowing him. But again, messed up. In this job, though, I learned a lot of things about my future career that I wanted to go into of being a funeral director. I had a lot of interesting calls. I worked for a livery service as a removal driver, and that's exactly what it sounds like. You go and you remove someone from where they passed and you bring them to where they need to go. Now remember, 4th grade me is in heaven. When I figure out, wait, there's a garage that has 40 hearses in it, and I get to work there? I thought this was cool. I didn't know this existed. And I go there for the interview, and they're talking to me, and they're like, why do you want to do this? I'm like, I don't know, I want to drive a hearse. And they're like, okay, that's a good enough reason. They didn't really have like people banging down the door to do this. And I had my Goodwill sport coat that was the wrong color black from my pants. They didn't care. And they're like, we don't usually get people who apply for this job who have hair and don't wear glasses. And I was like, well, thank you. Everybody else I worked with wanted to drive the funeral hearse, like the hearse that you see at a funeral. But they needed people to do the removals, which is, as you could imagine, lifting and going to scenes and situations that might not always be easy. There was one call in particular. There was a lot of calls. I went on like 1,000 calls in my 2 years of doing it full time, and then I did it part time. And we go out with the medical examiner, and we go out with any funeral home that called us. We'd go out in their place and do the work for them if they had something going on or it was difficult or whatever the situation. And I went on this call that was supposed to be a call with the ME's office, which would mean I would get in a hearse and I would go pick up a death investigator and we go to the scene of whatever happened. And they do all their, like CSI stuff. And I'm just, the guy in the CSI who's like standing by the Econoline Ford with a windbreaker that says a medical examiner. We don't wear windbreakers. I don't know where they come up with this stuff. But I was wearing a suit and a tie and a trench coat, and I'm just standing there like I felt like I was trying to be a creepy hearse driver because that's what you expect. So I'm just standing there like this, waiting for them to say, okay, we need you now. And this call in particular came in from the medical examiner, but then they said, no, it's not a medical examiner call. It's just, they had medical records. It's just a regular go out for such and such funeral home. We get out there, it's freezing cold in the wintertime. To set the scene here, we're driving a 95 Cadillac Fleetwood hearse. Yeah, what's nice about them, you can put 2 gurneys in the back when you get busy. Just think about that for a minute. So, and these things are rear-wheel drive, so I got pretty good at drifting a hearse. And we show up at this house. Now, the house that we're showing up at is, I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it's high dollar. The funeral home that was accepting the call used to be high dollar place back like in the 60s. This place was a dump, but we worked for them. So they thought we were coming and we're like, no, like we can't tell them like, don't go here, but it had gone downhill over the years. So we're at this really high, nice house and we get there and someone was working out and they had other medical issues and they shouldn't have been working out the way they were and they passed away. And my funeral director and I are gonna get our equipment, bring him downstairs. It's a weird situation. There's random relatives. Nobody really seemed to know what was going on. The police were there. They were willing to help, but not really. They want you to do it. They don't really want to get involved, which I don't blame them. If they wanted to be a hearse driver, they would have been a hearse driver. And this guy's a big guy, bigger than me in height and weight. And we're coming down the stairs. This is a nice house now. They wanted us to take our shoes off, and I never took my shoes off because we need our shoes on. And we get to the like super high polished flight of stairs that are like oak runners. I'm like, this is going to be dicey. And it was too tight to use our equipment, so we got the guy in a sheet and kind of a bag and drag situation, for lack of better terms. And I'm thinking I'm gonna go backwards. But the funeral director I was working with had an ego, and she insisted on being on the end. And she also always took her shoes off, and I'm like, this isn't gonna go well. So we go about 2 stairs down, and she loses her footing. The guy runs her over. I'm at the top holding on, but he slid out of our equipment, so like, I'm just standing here going, yeah, told you so. On the others, yep. So again, I'm thinking God called me to do this. Here's what he called me to do. I'm thinking this. On the other side of the wall is the police officer with the random family members, and we're hearing boom, 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 boom. So we gotta act fast, because the entryway is right there. So far, we're in a closed stairwell. So I'm like, if we can contain this, maybe they won't notice. So we have the quick reaction. She kind of recovers quickly halfway down the steps and jumps to the landing. I don't know how she did it. And he comes down and gets her right like that. And we stop him. I'm like, whew, okay, everybody, get your bearings. We're cool. We're fine. We get them all looking like that didn't just happen. And we get him on to and the cop sticks his head around the corner like, you guys serious? You got the best, you called us. So we get the person loaded up. We, explained they were slippery. We didn't really have to tell them. They heard what happened. So, and we go out to the hearse, and I slam the door, not the back door, the side door, and the door won't close. I'm like, 'cause it froze up. And it's winter time, so I'm doing what anybody would do and just ramming the door. But also, like, the family's watching you, expecting to leave, and I'm like, let's just drive away slowly. That's fine. We'll just take a right, because if we take a right, that's the door. It's not going to open. If we took a left, it open. Anyway, we get out there. I don't remember them. There was something blocking the road, the mail truck or something. So we had to go left. We go left, and the door's slowly opening. And I'm like, whatever, let's just keep going. We got away from the neighborhood, and I took a sheet and I crawled back there and I tied one door to the other door handle, so at least it was kind of closed. Yep. But luckily, our passenger didn't mind, and they weren't going to tell anybody. So if you want me to come back next week, I got, again, about 1,000 more of these stories. So at this time, I'm thinking, this is what God wants me to do. And if we go ahead, I think we're at slide 9 now. This is a time where the work environment I was in was kind of negative. And I definitely was more like I don't want to bother God. And maybe I'll pray sometimes because I feel like I'm supposed to. But it was just a very negative work environment. We were working 12-hour shifts. We were getting called in. Lots of people I worked with were not Christians. And not only that, they were just toxic personality people. Again, I'm realizing as things are going and my warped ideology, like, God isn't calling me to this. I don't think this is right. So I decided to take a year off. I worked in that job and did some other odd jobs. And I decided not to go to school to be a funeral director. And I felt like that was something from God. Like, I don't want you to do this. You wanted to do this. Like, listen here. And I responded, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to figure out something else. But then I started hearing things again from other people that I wasn't even asking their opinions. I started hearing things like, don't take time off school. You're never going to go back. People you don't even know, like somebody just asked what's going on, not even like family and friends, just other people. And it's like, mind your own beeswax. Why would you want to be a funeral director? That's creepy. Like, well, I didn't ask you what you think of my career choice, so mind your own beeswax. And I'm hearing negativity like this, so now I'm mad at God. If you wanted me to take time off and not pursue this career, this is difficult. I stepped out in faith. Now I kind of look like the loser who's not going to go back to school. At least that's how I felt. Maybe I should just keep going and ignore that, what God's telling me, and just get a degree in something and not deal with this negativity. I decided not to. Again, I was in this negative work environment. I got so burnt out doing that job that I quit, because when you work nonstop and then they keep calling you in and then they tell you you're on call and it never ends, nobody can keep up with that. And the more and more I did it, the less and less I wanted to be a funeral director. I mean, I didn't mind doing the hearse part, but like all the other things that go along with being a funeral director didn't really seem like they were my cup of tea as I got more in the business. So I decided at this point that I'm going to find some odd jobs. The teaching at church is going really well, this preschool teaching. Maybe I should be a teacher. Maybe that's what God wants me to do in this time, because I got a lot of free time now. I just quit my job. I was working odds and ends jobs, and maybe that's where he wants me to go. And I soon learned, in the district we were living in, they had a lot of special education setting 4 openings, like week-long vacancies for a para. I was like, well, I got a 2-year degree now. I could be a para. So I went and got my application in, and I started applying or accepting these sub-jobs for setting 4. Now, setting 4, if you're not in education, is where the student has so many needs, or for whatever reason can't be in the school setting any longer, is in a separate school, often within the district, but they have more needs than can be met at school. And I realized why there were so many vacancies. There were broken home after broken home that these kids were coming from. We had kids trying to dive out the window on the first floor to get away from us. We had kids trying to run away at recess, and I'm just like, what is going on here? There was like 6 of us staff members to 12 kids, and we still couldn't keep them under control. But you hear about their stories, and you go, yeah, I guess I would be acting that way if I was an 8-year-old who had a broken home like that. And about this time, too, I want you to hear this, but it was also for me. I'm starting to realize God isn't necessarily calling me to any certain career, but whatever you do, he wants you to do it for him and love him with all your heart, and he wants you to love others. And whatever your job is, if you need to hear that now or you've thought about that before, you didn't miss your calling if you're doing something that you think, well, I'm not a pastor, so I missed the boat. Or my warped. I'm not a funeral director, so I missed the boat. Whatever yours is, if you can love God and you choose to, and you can love other people, then that job that you have can be kingdom honoring, and you didn't miss the call. And I needed to hear that more. I kept trying to find, I'm gonna find the right thing. But it wasn't about that. So if we jump ahead here a little bit further, I did decide to pursue a degree in teaching, and I was gonna go to the U for being a funeral director, so I decided I'll just keep going there for teaching. But I was actually able to get into Bethel with more scholarships, and it cost me less money than to go to the U. So I decided to go to Bethel, and I got my elementary education degree. Believe it or not, all of my pre-mortuary science classes weren't super helpful for my teaching degree. And I made a lot of arguments with the dean and everybody, but apparently the aging psychology of aging, death, and dying isn't what you need on your resume. So, but I did learn this, and I tell you this because this is how I got my first teaching job. Being a teacher and being a funeral director require a lot of the same skills that apparently I have, and I realized that. Both jobs require you to plan for the day, dress nice and look professional, deal and interact with lots of people who are in varying emotional states. You have to have a common goal in mind, and you have to get everybody to that goal, whether they want to get there or not. You have to maintain your composure no matter what in the classroom, being a funeral director. I'm serious about this, you have to encounter bodily fluids on a regular basis. There were days teaching where I felt like I didn't see this many bodily fluids when I was a hearse driver. Then you have to stay on schedule with different parts of your day, even though there are going to be people who are trying to ruin it for you. Little people or big people. And with that, I'm going to Bethel. Early on in math lab, if I wouldn't have changed, I would not have met my wife. My wife at the time was my math lab tutor, and I was only going to math lab because I wanted extra credit. I didn't even need help with the math, but if you logged in, you got extra credit. And I was showing up in my suit and tie after driving the hearse, and my now wife thought that was very interesting that I had all these CSI type stories. Maybe I hammed them up a little. And back then, her family knew me as Dead Body Guy, and a lot of her family is here today. Now, why they would encourage their daughter to marry someone whose nickname was her friend Dead Body Guy, I'm not sure. That was my handle at the time. Also, that setting 4 experience where I worked with a lot of students who had special needs. I became a mentor for the Build program, which is a program that Bethel offers for students with learning disabilities. And we lived with students right on campus in our own dorm suite. And a lot of those experiences I had previously helped me kind of know how to interact when you're living and interacting with someone who has a disability. I also made a roommate that year who was the mentor. He was a friend of mine. He's now a good friend who I talk to every Friday. But at the time, when God put me in that situation, I see this guy walking in and like, this is your future roommate, the other mentor. And I'm thinking, that's the loser who shows up late to Christian theology every week with food and then falls asleep. He would show up to class late every week. He'd go sit in the front, that's the last spot open. He'd eat his food very noisily, and then he'd fall asleep. Now I gotta live with this guy for a whole year and help these other dudes with disabilities? This is ridiculous. But now he's a good friend of mine, and we just visited him last week when we were out east for my wife's job. It's funny how your own perceptions get in the way of who God's trying to lead you to. Here, I'd also like to point out, 7 years is quite a long time for a teacher or for a hearse driver to be teaching. So I think that's where God called me to be. We now have 2 kids, as I said. We've now moved 3 times. And if we'll take a look here at this next slide, this is 2 Timothy 1:7. This is a verse I always memorize wrong as 1 Timothy 2:7. If you go look up that verse, it's not even close. So it's 2 Timothy 1:7. The Lord did not give you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. And I want to emphasize, he did not give you a spirit of fear. And I put down there in my own words, fear and worry are not from God. He gives us strength, endless love, and God-honoring thoughts. So if you are ever feeling like you want to do something, but you have fear or worry gripping you, that's not from God. And there were these times where I needed to step out, and I did, and I should have stepped out, and I didn't, and I let fear or worry get in the way of what other people's comments, how they made me feel, or what are people going to think if I do this. But that's not from God. And God wants you to be strong, and God wants you to be loving, and God wants you to be of sound mind for him. And with that here, I might have one slide. Let's check the next slide. Yes, God's plan, not mine. I want you to think about, back to our prayer slide. How do you pray? Do you pray? Why do you pray? And I want to end you with this question. How close do you want to be to God? Because how close you are to him depends a lot on that prayer. And wherever you are on that prayer spectrum or wherever you've been, I just want you to think about that. How do you pray? Do you pray? Why do you pray? And how close do you want to be to God?